Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to introduce David Lockspeiser. David studied aircraft design at Miles Aeronautical Technical School and Hawker Siddeley, 1945 to 1949. He joined the RAF when aircrew recruiting restarted, and after flying training was posted to a fighter squadron in Germany, which was reforming. In 1955, during a second tour in Fighter Command, he was offered a job as a test pilot with Hawker Aircraft Limited, and I think did quite a lot of testing on Hunters. In 1968, he obtained a commercial pilot's license and joined the Civil Aircraft Division of the British Aircraft Corporation. 4 years later, he was encouraged to form Lockspeiser Aircraft Limited, staying with BAC until 1976, when he left to concentrate on promoting the Land Development Aircraft project. From 1977, he worked under contract with a branch of Lockheed Aircraft in Singapore, carrying out test flying programs on comprehensive updates on their Hunter aircraft, involving weapons, reconnaissance, and instrumentation. In 1987, the LDA, Land Development Aircraft prototype, was destroyed in an arson attack on the hangar where it was housed. David has more than 7,000 flying hours on 160 different aircraft types, and is still very much interested in aviation. It's a great pleasure. I invite him to talk to us now about the Boxer utility land development aircraft. David Lockspeiser.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and it's very nice to be invited, very flattered to be invited to talk about my aircraft project. When Kit introduced me with those few words, he mentioned that I helped reform a fighter squadron in Germany, which was in the early 50s, and which we did. It was a Vampire squadron. We had 7 aircraft. I just thought I'd mention this. It's nothing to do with the lecture, actually. But there were 3 of us, and we took it in turns to be CO, adjutant, and squadron pilot. And that was quite an enjoyable time of life, actually. But the Boxer, what I hope to talk about, is to tell you the whole story right from the very beginning, the origins of it, and the role that it would fulfill. It started off as a crop spraying aeroplane, with a secondary role as a utility aeroplane. The people who gave the most valuable information on that were the New Zealanders, because I think they started crop spraying, actually. And the chap called Gibson, who was Deputy Director of Civil Aviation Department in New Zealand at the time, he said, why doesn't someone build us an airplane which is like a tractor, with all these simplistic things? It wants to be functional, it needs to be easy to maintain, interchangeable parts, and they wanted to be able to use it for crop spraying. They wanted to be able to clean the pesticide and stuff from it. So for that reason, he was in favour of a design which had tubular steel with fabric covering, so you could take it off and hose it all down. And so that very largely influenced my thinking, obviously. And of course, two very important things was, when it was crop spraying, a waste of time was when the airplane's on the ground, refueling with crop spraying, pesticides, or whatever it may be. And the other thing is that when it's a non-crop spraying season, the airplane wants to be versatile enough to be able to do a utility role. So that was the basis on which it all kind of started. And I got interested in this idea. So I did a study of the comparative market at the time. And if I may have the first slide, please. This is a typical crop spraying aeroplane of that era. They don't hang around anymore. I mean, it's bad news, crop spraying nowadays. So it's you know, I don't know how many crop sprayers are engaged at the moment, but very, very few. This was a typical one. Next slide, please. That's another one, the Grumman Ag Cat. As you can see, they're sort of okay for crop spraying. They can put spray booms on them, but not terribly good as an alternative utility roll. And the next slide, please. This was the air truck, which was designed in Australia. Actually, I went to visit them. The idea was that the loader would drive his truck up between the booms to load the hopper, which was behind the cockpit. And then the chap would take off, taxi away, leaving the hopper behind. That's the typical sort of thing which was currently going. I've got a list here of the comparative market, and there are 14 different aircraft types. I mean, there's Beech 36, the Cessna 180, the Piper Cherokee 6, the Beaver, the Helio, the Aeromacchi, Pilatus Porter. That was in the utility market. And in the agricultural role was the Cessna Cessna Agwagon, Grumman Ag Cat, Trust Commander, Quail Commander, Piper Pawnee, and the Fletcher FU-24. And the total production they had in those days, 1963 to 70, was 12,500 aircraft. Average yearly production was 1,583, so there was a fair market actually to be attacked there. And whatever a new aeroplane was going to do, it had to obviously do it better than that market, which I had just read out. The average payload was about 1,800 pounds, or 6 people, and so that was the kind of size of aeroplane I was going for. I thought, when I studied this market, that actually the whole configuration for the role that was to be, for this role, crop spraying and utility, and when you're flying low, as the crop sprayers did, you want to have extremely good visibility. I mean, the pilot, to be safe, wants to have extremely good visibility. He wants to have a very low fatigue level cockpit. He wants to be a comfortable cockpit with good visibility and low noise and vibration level. So all of that really, and you want to be very not good handling characteristics, particularly low speed, because they flew very low and they turned very steeply, very close to the ground. So low speed handling and stalling characteristics were vital. So I thought, well, George Miles, when he introduced the Libellula designs in the 40s, I thought that was the configuration that would best suit this role. May I have the next slide, please? This is the, sorry, I jumped around. That is the agricultural role that I was talking about. So the average 1,800 pounds with a wing loading of 15.3 pounds a square foot, a power loading of 12.3, reading off the bottom line, and a takeoff run of 680 feet. And the price then was, the average price was 12,700. So the bottom line is something which I was endeavoring to beat. Next slide, please. This is George Miles' Libellula design, the first one, the M35. And you will notice that it's got the tandem wing airplane, rather higher aspect ratio foreplane is right aerodynamically, and a low-mounted main plane. Actually, it wasn't very successful, but the next slide, please, was, and this was the twin-engine version, and it was a very elegant and very good little airplane. And he designed that primarily because you get lift from both surfaces, front and rear. You could build a smaller airplane. And the idea in George Miles' mind, as I understand it, was it could be used as a shipborne fighter without having to have any wing fold, because it would be capable of lifting whatever the design, required payload was, but with a smaller sized airplane. So that was that. So I thought, well, something along those lines is what would be a good idea. So may I have the next slide, please? So this is about the first sort of scheme I did of what I call the land development aircraft. And to avoid any misunderstanding on nomenclature and so forth, I should say that the basic aeroplane, the production aeroplane, was going, I call the Land Development Aircraft LDA-01. The airplane I built with friends, that we built, was a 7/10 size proof of concept, which we call the LDA-01. So, no full-sized airplane has been built, only the proof of concept 70% size airplane. And so the idea of the four-wheeled undercarriage was that in order to cut down the time spent on the ground in a crop spraying row, was that the aircraft would land and then taxi around. The ground crew would have an inflatable trough into which they'd put the crop spraying stuff, and the aircraft could then taxi over this trough. The pack, which you can see underneath, the blob in the middle of the fuselage is the center of gravity, and the pack you can see underneath it is removable, but it could also it could drop down, so that it could be hinged there, and then this would come down, and as the aircraft taxied over the trough, it would scoop up, rather like a railway train used to take on water. It would scoop it all up, and the aircraft wouldn't actually have to stop to equip itself, refuel with crop spraying stuff. And when the season came to be a non-crop spraying agricultural type season, then the pack could be used to change roles. You could put things in it, cargo, whatever. That was the initial kind of thinking. May I have the next slide, please? Right, so having thought about that, I built this model. It's a rubber-powered 8-square ball cell. I expect several people here might have built models in those. You simply draw out the side view of the fuselage, and then with pins either side of 8-square ball cell, glue it all together, make two sides, and then obviously you could draw a plan view, and then stick it together, and there you have it. And that was, the standard way of building model airplanes in those days. This model, you could put both wings onto the same part of the fuselage. Foreplane and the main plane could both go on the top. They could both go on the bottom, or you could put the foreplane on the top and the main wing at the bottom, as George Miles had on his M35, or you could do it the other way around and have, as this model is in this configuration, with the main plane at the back and the foreplane at the front. Almost needless to say, the lift-drag ratio was quite clearly in favor of just having the wings as far apart from each other as possible. So it went better with the wings separated by the depth of the fuselage. I've still got that car, by the way. But I don't have hair anymore. This is the GA of the airplane, 7/10 size proof of concept LDA-01, which we decided to build. We started. It took 4 years. We started in August 1967, and we did actually have an engine. It was an 85 horsepower Continental engine, and it was, as Kit mentioned, I used to be with Hawkers, and I visited the Lebanon on several Middle East air forces who had our airplanes, and one day while I was waiting for something to be serviceable, I found a little Italian airplane. And they said it was unserviceable. And I was looking for an engine. And they said, "Oh, Mr. David, you can have it, So I said, "Thanks very much." So they arranged the shipping. And somebody said one of the most remarkable things about this whole project is that the Lebanese actually gave me something and paid for it to be shipped back to England. But so you can't see it. We built the airplane in an Nissen hut, and you can probably see that. Probably. Out of sight is the bench where the engine was, and a very friendly Rolls-Royce man overhauled it and put in thrust bearings so it would be usable in the pushing as opposed to the tractor sense. This is my friend George Smith, and we built the airplane together pretty well. And the first thing we did was to build the fuselage, and this is a fuselage jig, so half-inch ply lofted out the side of the fuselage on this, and exactly as we built the model airplane, of which you saw a picture earlier, we, instead of pins and 8 square balsa. It was these brackets and this square sectioned steel tube. It's T45, 22 gauge tube. I lofted this out sort of thing. We stuck the things, and then we cut holes around here, so that we got an AID-approved welder to come and weld it all up. And we made 2 halves, stuck together, and built it exactly as you build a model airplane. May I have the next slide, please? This is the chap who did the welding. He worked at Kingston. And this is the nose of the airplane. This is the cockpit, and that's George. And that's an apprentice, I think, who came down to help. Next slide, please. This is the wing, A-wing section. Of course, as mentioned earlier, the airplane has all wing sections were the same. I mean, it became apparent during the design it would be possible to do this, so that the port and starboard main plane and the foreplane are identical. So we made 4 wing panels, and one for test, doing a structural test on, the rest to be used on the aircraft. That was one of them. The idea was that as the design evolved, the aircraft could have many interchangeable parts. All the wing panels are interchangeable, and all the control surfaces. So you'd have 3 separate, identical wing panels and 6 separate but identical control surfaces. And obviously, there's an advantage in the tooling and cost of tooling and learning curve of production, as well as spares holding and so forth for the operator. Next slide, please. Now, this is the rear of a photograph taken at the rear end of the fuselage. That is the lower lift strut attachment. Because it didn't have any money, this airplane was built with an enormous amount of assistance from a lot of pals and so forth, but financially, it all came out of my taxed income. So there wasn't, I couldn't say, well, go and get the wing attachment turned up out of titanium or something. So the only machined parts, in fact, in the whole airplane were the wheel axles and the wing attachment lugs, of which that is one. And that's about all. Most things we designed to make it out of bending a bit of 18 gauge light alloy and welding it up. That sort of approach. So being impecunious, in a way, added to the philosophy, assisting the philosophy of the design, which is simplicity and economy. Because one of the objects of this airplane was that if it got into, when it was fully developed and a going concern, was that it should be manufactured by countries overseas under license who would benefit from expanding their own aircraft industry and actually have a market to use it in their own countries. So that looking at Africa and South America and anywhere which wanted to make airplanes and then wanted to use them. I'd like you to just remember this particular, because I'm going to mention this later. The main undercarriage is a light alloy tube across there. There's a steel elbow joint there. It's welded around there. And this is a light alloy leg down to where the wheel goes on, and the same on the other side. It was pivoted there, and then these were arms which came back, and there was rubber, bungee, like a sort of SE5 kind of approach to the undercarriage system, which was wrapped around there. I will mention this later, but that is, you can get an idea of the fuselage structure from that, I think. Next, please. This is the front undercarriage, which is built the same way, with steel elbows, light alloy tubes. This is the frame for the instrument panel, and this is the seat, which was welded up and was adjustable fore and aft. Next slide, please. We came to putting the wing on as with the assembly, and this is all done at Lunsford outside the Nissen hut. There's the door of the Nissen hut. Four-wheeled undercarriage. It started off with 4 wheels, all the same size, and I don't know whether it's on there, but I managed to get an ex-Hurricane 4-channel radio for a £5, and best deal I think I ever got out of Hawkers. anyhow, that's just as a matter of possible interest. I could say that I've got a quick list here of the history of building. We started in June the 1st, 1967. August the 3rd was the fuselage jig, we've seen. September the 9th was the starboard side of the fuselage. October the 7th of 1967, fuselage basically was finished. In 98, the engine mounting was made. The seat was welded up. We saw that on the previous thing. September the 7th, 68, the engine was fitted. And the fins and rudders were started in October and finished in December. 1969, January, the control surfaces were started. In August, we decided there were other things which we thought we'd like to introduce, but decided not to introduce any more changes. We'd finish it as drawn as soon as possible. And in September, we did the control group. Now, next slide, please. And this is the control group. Now, this airplane differs from the sort of canards that you often see or hear and read about, inasmuch that most people think, when you're looking at things like that, well, either the airplane's going backwards or at least the tailplane's in the front, so obviously the elevator must be there and the ailerons are probably at the back. But it's not so on this airplane, because I wanted to get super safe stalling characteristics. And after all, these are going to be flown very close to the ground, and you might be trying to get into a very small field and pull the stick back, and you don't want to have any trouble if you start getting into the burble and the airplane's about to stall. So decided that the best, and particularly as the center of gravity of the airplane is about here. So we're getting roughly a third of the lift there and 2/3 there, but the center of gravity is there, which is not very far away from the trailing edge of the wing. It is much further away from the foreplane, of course. So I thought I won't have enough elevator power on just the two inboard controls. So I made the whole of the trailing edge elevator and the outboard section aileron and the inboard section flat. So, and on the foreplane, it was pitch trim. So if you sat in the cockpit, from the pilot's point of view, everything was normal. You had a stick which worked the elevator. If you pushed it forward on right, it moved the ailerons if you moved it laterally, and you had a trim wheel which moved the foreplane flat. So from a pilot operation point of view, it was the same as an ordinary airplane. But this gadget here was designed so that, I don't know if you can see it properly from this, but if you can imagine the stick being moved fore and aft, this is the stick, basically it has obviously something else stuck into it. If you move it all these three rods move together, fore and aft. If you if you move the stick laterally, then this will, depending which way you push it, one rod will be pushed back and the other one will be pushed forward. So that moved the ailerons. So that was port aileron, starboard aileron, and center flap. And all three are elevator. And that's the way that it worked. And it worked quite well. If you move the stick diagonally, of course you've got a proportion of the combined movement. I mean, the drawback was that I couldn't really, at this stage of the game, feed in aileron differential. So I accepted the fact that the aeroplane would suffer from having some adverse yaw characteristics. But that's something I felt I could put up with. This is a research aeroplane, and it wasn't. It would be a refinement which would be necessary, but I wouldn't wait until I got more time to develop that into it. That's the instrument panel, which is basically from that line to the right, engine, and from that line to the left, flying instruments. Next slide, please. This is the airplane, more or less finished, but obviously uncovered. That's the pack there. The fuel tank, 15 gallons, is there. We later put another one in there. And this is the canopy. And four-wheeled undercarriage. And that's the old Lebanese engine at the back. Next slide, please. This is putting the fabric covering on. As I mentioned earlier, what the a requirement that the New Zealanders were keen on was that you could be able to take the fabric off and just inspect everything and hose it all down to clean it all down for pesticide stuff and so forth. And I think you can see the 85 horsepower Continental engine there very well, and fixed pitch propeller there. All these ribs are all the same, of course. Next slide, please. I put a sort of luggage rack on it so you could carry the wings around, and that was the first photograph showing that. And the next slide, please. And this was, when it was finished, all the component parts. So you could see that it was a bit like a kit, really. Next slide, please. This shows the cockpit, as you sort of approach it to get into it. And the next slide, please. This shows it with most of the, that's the radio. That's the stick leading to the mixing box down there. That's the rudder bar across there. And these are the engine instruments. And these are flight instruments. Next slide, please. This view view was the most important thing, as I think I've stressed. And this gives you a rough idea how good the view is out of the cockpit. And it really was very good. And I mean, you really could fly the aeroplane within inches, not just feet of the ground. It was very, very easy. And it was a very great, well, it makes all the difference between, having a great engine with a propeller going round in front of you and obstructing your view. Next slide, please. Now, this is the control system, which I have briefly mentioned. It was all rod to bell cranks, cable to pulleys out to the wing to another bell crank, and rods to the control surface. So it went rod, cable, rod via pulleys and bell cranks. So the rudder movement was 30 degrees either side. The flap movement was up 16 and down 33. Aileron up 28, down 20. And the foreplane flap, which is trim, is up 10 and down 42. The normal CG datum of the airplane was, as this shows, the datum was the leading edge of the foreplane. It was 114 inches aft, and that was the middle of the pack, and that was the normal CG. But the advantage of this lift distribution, of course, is that you've got lift here and lift there. So the CG movement was something like, it was 4 times greater than a conventional airplane, and it was very, very great. It really didn't come into it wasn't a problem. May I have the next slide, please? This photograph was taken on an engine run test before the aircraft flew, and I'm actually holding the stick back, so you can see here that the whole of the trailing edge of the wing being elevator is up. That just sort of shows that it is. Now, these fences and things were introduced as a result of wind tunnel work. And I must say that the British Aircraft Corporation were incredibly helpful and sympathetic and understanding and very encouraging. They really were. And because they did some wind tunnel tests for me, which was, amongst other things, which I think it may come to them. May I have the next slide, please? No, I'll come to the wind tunnel testing later. It's a bit difficult because things didn't all follow in one natural sequence, and one would have to dart around, which would just be confusing if I did that. So I'll talk about the wind tunnel bit briefly in a little while. This is the first flight, which took place at Wisley on the first, when is it? It was the 24th of August 1971. As the first flight. It had been preceded by a number of little hops. One advantage of having a small airplane is that you can do that. You can take off, get it a feet above the ground, and then plonk it back on again and feel away. And what became very apparent was that it was very low on directional stability at that speed, around takeoff speed. So I thought it would improve matters to put this central fin on. So that was a mod before embarking on a proper first flight. It's one of those things that seemed like a good idea at the time. It didn't actually work out all that well, but anyhow. May I have the next slide, please? This is a photograph taken by the chase aeroplane on one of the early flights, and you can see that this fin, which has been stuck up there as an additional thing to try and improve the directional stability. It didn't, because it contributed to the dihedral effect, and it presented very little advantage on directional stability, so I took it off, and we did some other things later. May I have the next slide, please? This was a fly, one day I got all the people who had been, so many people who've been very kind and done all sorts of things and helping, and so this was a flying day at Wisley to sort of people who'd helped me with all kinds of aspects. Generally speaking, on the design side, I know enough about it to know that I don't know enough about it. So I'd design something, and then I'd ask, and I'd the same with aerodynamics, and I'd say, what do you think of this? And they'd either say, yeah, that'll be all right, or no, it won't, and suggest something else. So that was the way it sort of evolved, became into being. Next slide, please. There are quite a few flying shots here that show very clearly the plankiness of the wings. All aircraft designers are compromised, and pretty obviously the biggest compromise in this design is to sacrifice aerodynamic and visual elegance for practicality and simplicity. And I wasn't trying to make it look at all pretty at this stage of the game. I just wanted to check that the aerodynamic and handling characteristics were as I'd hoped they would be. Next slide, please. This is another shot at Wisley. You can see from here, the pilot, you can see, as obviously from the ground, how clearly you can see him. So he can see you as clearly. It gives an indication of the view from the cockpit, how good it was. Next slide, please. And that's just another shot also taken at Wisley. Next, please. Right, now the wind tunnel. BAC's 5-foot tunnel at Weybridge. They conducted some tests on the aircraft as it is, and they very helpfully came up with the recommendation, with advice, that at the stalling incidence, which is, it was about 15 degrees as it normally is, there is a vortex which comes from the tip of the foreplane and hits the main plane. So when you're up like that, this vortex will hit the main plane and destroy the airflow. So found out in the wind tunnel was that happened, and so the fin and rudder was already there, so that acted as a fence over the wing. So this additional fence was added, and that contained. There's no airflow going through this thing at the moment. That's why all the tufts are hanging down. So when it was at stalling up to sort of 15 degrees, the vortex came and hit the main plane about there. There's another picture that will show that. At the same time, tests were done on the larger aeroplane, the LDA-01 as opposed to the 01, and it was as a result of this. And so the wingtip. So the results of that was that the fins and rudders, instead of being in the middle of the wing, should be at the wingtip, and that would mean 2 more fences in the wing, since the fin on the LDA-01 is not there now. And this is a different wing section, incidentally. It was NACA 23012 on the LDA-01, and the proposed one for the LDA-01 is NACA 2412, I think. So it's a change of wing section, and the major thing was putting the fins on the wingtips, and that did quite a lot. Next slide, please. This shows what happens on the left. We've got the angle of incidence is at 15 degrees or 14.9, and there's no yaw on the aeroplane, and you can see that everything's flying. Okay, there's a bit of breakaway there, but the vortex which comes from the tip of the foreplane strikes the main plane here, and you can see the disturbed flow on the main plane, which is contained by, that is the fin, and that there's the fence. Very difficult to see on air, but believe me, that's the fence and that's the fin, and you can see that the flow on the main plane is unstalled. Remember that the object of the exercise was to make the foreplane stall first, which it naturally didn't want to do because it's a very low aspect ratio surface. So it had to be persuaded to stall first in order that the stalling characteristics would be the ones that were desired. When you have yaw, in addition to the incidence, if you then have 10 degrees of yaw on the aeroplane, then the vortex, instead of coming straight back to there, of course, came over to here. So the flow did break away a bit around here, but it's a pretty acute position to be in. You know, you're up at 15 degrees, and then having done that, you're then going like that as well. I mean, you're all set up for a spin, really. So it still was behaving quite well. Next slide, please. This shows the effect on the stalling characteristics of when it was first tested with zero incidence on the foreplane. This was the lift slope curve. This is a pitching moment curve, very violent pitch up. So it was developed in the wind tunnel to put 2.5 degrees of incidence on the foreplane, all part of making it stall first, as opposed to this. So that's something we played about with later in the hour. So that was that meant that the stall was made a bit smoother, and the pitch up was much more mild, and so that's how it was. This is how it was developed for flight, the LDA-01. This is the second wind tunnel model, which is the wind tunnel model of the full-sized aeroplane, which has got the NACA 2412 section, and it had 3 degrees foreplane incidence in relation to the main plane incidence, and that has, as you can see, a much smoother pitching curve and lift curve. So those wind tunnel tests were really extremely valuable. Next, please. Right, now the CG, one of the whole things as I've been saying is to get a very wide CG range, and this certainly did. That's 75 pounds of lead right in the nose of the aeroplane. That was to test the forward CG case. By this time, we could also, I think I mentioned earlier, put another 15-gallon fuel tank in front of the cargo bay area, as well as the one which was built in originally in the rear. So we got 15 gallons of fuel in 2 fuel tanks separated by the length of the cargo bay, also to play with CG range. And actually, that's quite a lot of weight in the nose. It was not something you could ever practically possibly achieve. May I have the next slide, please? For stalling trials, I fitted a tail parachute, which was, that's actually a Nat tail parachute, and it was modified with a Vickers slip here and a control in the cockpit. I never had to use it in flight, but I did do ground tests, both streaming and jettison, and that worked okay. So it was a safety device which obviously anybody would have on an airplane that they were experimenting with to carry out that sort of exercise of stalling. Next slide, please. We made 4 wings panels, as I mentioned earlier, and the 4th panel was loaded structurally. And it went to 120%. Before something inside broke, but the whole thing didn't break. That's Roger Dabbs, who oversaw the structures. He was head of structures at Kingston, and whenever I designed anything, I'd send it off to Roger, and he'd either sort of thicken it up or lighten it or do something, and so he was very helpful. and this was a chap at Herne who was helping with making some of the modifications. So that's just a picture of our wing structure test. Next, please. That wing, which you've just seen, panel just seen, was used for things like this. The idea of the aeroplane was that it could carry all its own spare parts. Everything would go inside except the wings, but you could carry a spare wing panel underneath on a sort of luggage rack arrangement, so that a fleet operator would be able to, if you've got an airplane stuck 150 miles up the road, he wouldn't have to get a bigger airplane or ground transport or whatever. He could fly in one of his other airplanes anything he needed to rectify whatever the problem was. Next slide, please. Now, this is a picture. You might think it's a bit strange because you can see that it's painted in camouflage colors on this side with Army written on it, and it's painted white, civilian colors on that side. So the thing is, the first international air show I took it to was Le Bourget in 1975. I wanted to show that the aircraft could be either a land development airplane or a light defense aircraft, so that although it was meant to be for the benefit of mankind and helping people do things, I recognized that a military application is something which one couldn't really ignore, and might even, be the best way of getting funding, perhaps. But so that's why it's painted like that. And the next slide, please. And that's another picture taken before going to Paris. This is the camouflage side. That's the oil cooler, the air intake. We've got a pitot head tube here, I think, now, which has got all the sort of yaw vanes and things on it, and that's another pitot head, which, if you're not doing any sort of testing, you just remove that and just rely on that one. By this time, I put some fiberglass wingtips on it, and you can very clearly see here the fin and rudder and the wing fence. Next slide, please. This is at Le Bourget. We're on the static park, because the plan was that every day, and everybody knows you've been all these things, that the aircraft's on static display during the day, and then at the time of the display, the aircraft taken out to the area to perform. And this is where we were parked, very conveniently next to the bar. And that's George Smith, who helped me build the aeroplane. That's my nephew, Andrew Saunders, he and George came out in the car, and I flew the aeroplane over to Le Bourget. And that is us in the static part there. Next slide, please. Now, I flew every day, and everything was fine. And then at the end of the week on Friday, the plan was that about 3/4 of an hour before we were due to fly, and the timing was very precise, of course, and I'd asked to fly after the Vigans because I thought they'd got their aerodynamics right on the Vigan, and so I wanted to follow another aeroplane which had a small wing at the front. I mean, that was a joke, really. But so I did, in fact, after the Vigans landed, I was due to take off. And every day I'd walk out 20 minutes beforehand, call up on the radio and see if everything was going all right. And obviously, normally it was. And so I taxied out and to the takeoff point, and then carried on performing as normal. This particular day, on the Friday at the end of the week, I couldn't get near. As I walked towards the airplane, I saw a great swarm coming over, and this is an anecdote which is, I find very queer. And I saw this great swarm coming towards the airplane, and I thought, mosquitoes or something, and then it was bees, and they sat on top of the canopy. That is a rear view mirror, by the way. So the bees are sitting here and covering the whole thing. And I couldn't get near the cockpit, obviously. And these are French pompiers who came out to get rid of the bees for me. And a voice from the crowd said, very clearly, "David, it will never fly again." And I thought, that's a very strange thing to say. So I made some crack about being a very versatile airplane with its own beehive. But, I mean, if you saw somebody's car outside with a whole lot of bees on it, you wouldn't say it'll never drive again, would you? But that's what he said, and both Andrew and George, we all heard him say that. And anyhow, that was that. May I have the next slide, please? This is the Tu-104, the Concorde scheme. The chaps are still trying to get the bees out of the thing, see? And it took them some time. Obviously, I missed my flying slot. So, the very nice chap who ran the whole show, Pierre, I can't remember his name, Pierre, he ran the test pilot show school at Cazet, the French thing. And I said, "Pierre, I want to fly at the end of the program because I haven't been able to get into my slot because I've been stopped by bees, and they're French bees." And he said, "Oh, David, c'est pas possible, no, you have civil traffic." So I said, "It's okay, I'm only joking." Anyhow, I wasn't allowed to fly because civil traffic started again. And that was it. That evening, they said they wanted all the aircraft to go over to the other side of the airfield because some difference in their arrangements, and the big aeroplanes were towed and the little aeroplanes taxied across. So after everybody had gone home, except the people who were working there, like us, I got in it and I taxied it round the perimeter track, and I think it was runway 24 at Le Bourget, and the perimeter track goes round the end. There's a bit of a bump in it, and as I taxied over that, the starboard undercarriage leg sheared off, and the aeroplane fell right over onto the starboard wingtip, broke, didn't do an enormous amount of damage, but it did sufficient damage to put the whole aeroplane out of action. And that was pretty horrific, a bit of a disaster, and lots of people came to help. And in the end, I had to take the aeroplane to bits and bring it back on a low loader. And I remember this chap in the crowd saying, "It will never fly again," which I thought was a very extraordinary thing to say. And I wish I could find him to ask him why on earth he would say that. But those bees saved my life. Well, they saved the aeroplane. If it hadn't happened, if they hadn't come and stopped me from flying, it might have happened on takeoff. It would most certainly have happened on landing, obviously. And I'd have splattered the airplane all over the runway, and it would, in front of everybody, it would have been terrible. And the thing that had gone wrong, you remember when I showed you the undercarriage being welded up, and I said, "Remember this angle joint?" It was here. That actually hadn't been made to the drawing. There was supposed to be a disc in there, but the chap had only put a strip, and it was, you could see it, the weld had failed all the way around, it was a failure there. It was obviously progressive. It had gone half rusty, so it was obviously something that had been progressively coming on. So, you know, I've always had a very soft spot for bees ever since then. May I have the next slide, please? This is just part of the development. You know, to improve the thing about, I haven't really talked very much about the controls, but the thing about the rudder was it was extremely powerful, but had no feel in it at all, so I put some springs into the circuit and a bit of horn balance on the top and the bottom, and that's which you can see here, that's a bit of doped thing, adding horn balance to it. And this is a fixed pitch wooden propeller. Next slide, please. And this is with we put a bigger engine in it, Lycoming 160 horsepower engine, and a Hoffman propeller. And all this took place around the time of just before going to Paris, actually. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier about layering the pack to act as a scoop. Imagine a trough underneath here so that it could scoop stuff up into here. Or you just remove the pack and, you know, fill it with something else. Next slide, please. Instead of the pack, one could have, you know, a fuselage with side opening doors in which you could put all the whatever it is you wanted to put. And this, as the accent has gone off crop spraying and very much onto general utility, the design then evolved really into being one that very positively had to be a front section, a rear section, and a center section. And the center section could be anything you liked. You could either have doors like this, you could have a removable pack, and similarly the front section could be single-seater or two-seater or three-seater if you put a helicopter-type bubble on it. That is the way the project was progressing. May I have the next slide, please? This is the only shot I've got. You see that square hole, there's a camera. There's a bloke inside, and he took some taking photographs of the ground for some survey thing. So that was the aircraft actually being employed for, actually. I mean, as opposed to its primary role of development and demonstration. I think this is a good time to say that what was right with the aeroplane, from a handling point of view, was that the control power was very good. In fact, I thought I needed to have all that trailing edge business elevator, but I had more than enough elevator power. What was bad was and it was very maneuverable because controls are very powerful. What was bad was it was very difficult to coordinate turn entry because it had low directional stability at low speed. It was all right at higher speed, but you had to really, be light quick with your feet. But I mean, that was a function of not having any aileron differential, and that would be brought into the thing as part of the refinement. And that is actually what would have been the case of what was introduced on this drawing. This is a 3-view GA of the aeroplane in its what I thought or hoped would be its final stage of development before being, to a production standard. What is different about this one? It's still the same LDA-01. We put a smoother canopy on it to reduce the drag, because it's a very draggy canopy. We put fins and rudders on the wingtips, as was worked out and by the wind tunnel investigation and so forth. And because I had more than enough elevator power, we did away with that mixing box and just introduced normal controls. In other words, ailerons, port and starboard, flaps, ailerons, port and starboard, elevators, port and starboard, and four-plane flap trim, port and starboard. So just pitch trim, pitch control, roll control. The great advantage of that was that when you came to stall the aeroplane, and this worked well, the first indication the pilot gets is the stick starts to shake a bit or something, and then eventually the nose drops, which is what happened. But as soon as the nose drops, it immediately starts reflying because the main plane hasn't stalled. And if you did what you would instinctively do as a pilot when you feel the airplane stalling and the nose drops, and you push the stick forward, and recovery is immediate. If, however, as some pilots might think, you're very close to the ground and be absolutely terrified and hold the stick hard back, it wouldn't matter. And this is the whole point, because all that would happen is the airplane, you've got the stick hard back, so you've got the pitch control on the main plane, which has not stalled, trying to make the airplane pitch up, and as soon as the foreplane stalled, the nose would drop, and then it would unstall itself. So you could, if you took power off and carried out that maneuver, stalled the airplane, and took the power off, kept the power off, kept the stick in your stomach, it would just go downhill, nodding. And if you put power on, it would either maintain a level flight or climb, nodding. So it demonstrated, exactly what I'd hoped it would, that it would have extremely safe, low-speed handling. And the real three major features of the whole project really is that the airplane is safer, and it is more simple, and it's more versatile than any other aeroplane in its category. So this actually was built, but not flown. So I cannot say that these modifications which were introduced, designed and built, but not fitted, because it hasn't been flown. So it's one of the tragedies of the situation. I can't put my hand on my heart and say it was fully developed to a production configuration. I believe that it would be, but it's not the same thing as actually having proved it. May I have the next slide, please? This is that aeroplane of which you've just seen the GA, made, as I say, all the parts, wingtip, fins and rudders. Next slide, please. And this is it for transport. You've seen a picture earlier of the wing underneath the fuselage that I made a sort of luggage rack, which was some square tubes across the top of the fuselage and underneath, and then some rods which went up and down. So you had a complete luggage rack, like a car really. So you could put the wings on the side, you could put the third wing underneath, and you could put everything else inside, and you could taxi the aeroplane like that. And as they had this problem in France, following the B incidents, that undercarriage obviously had to be thrown away. So this undercarriage is off a Cessna 150, which I got from the air accident investigation people at Farnborough, who some Cessna 150 had gone into the Solent some time ago, and they dragged the remains out. But of course, it's just steel, so they were perfectly strong. So that's a Cessna 150 undercarriage, and actually this undercarriage, the nose leg, was and always was from the word go off a Piper tripacer. I mean, I thought that, rather like Colin Chapman with his motor cars, if you can use somebody else's headlamps and somebody else's door handles and all the rest of it, it's a much better way of doing it than redesigning all those things yourself. So I tried to use as many existing parts from other aircraft as I could, and that's, apart from instruments and tires, actually, it's a bit difficult to think of any except for the undercarriage, which do come from other aircraft. Now have the next, please. Incidentally, if anybody wants to ask a question at any time, do feel free to do so. I mean, I'll certainly take any questions at the end, but if in the process, please do. So this is a 3-view GA of the basic final production aeroplane, the LDA-01, or the Boxer, as I imagined it would be going to be a production aeroplane. You can see from here that the foreplane is held on by 4 center wing bolts. Those 4 center wing bolts take, originally had the fin and rudder in it, and the lift strut and the picketing point. In this case, it would be the lift strut, picketing point, and pylon positions. So that is really the basic aeroplane, and that's a model of it down here, which I've brought along, of this in its basic form. It could also, of course, be fitted with floats. May I have the next slide, please? And this is a picture of the drawing of a 3-view GA of it just fitted with floats to show how they would be attached. And if you ever wanted to go to the old 4-wheeled undercarriage arrangement, that facility would be in there, and of course you'd use that to attach floats. And then there's another version which, may I have the next slide, please? This may be a bit difficult, but I was, I don't know if anybody you have ever been for a ride in a sort of sightseeing tour aeroplane, like a Cessna 180 or 185 or whatever, but I did in South Island, New Zealand, ski-equipped, a beautiful scenery. And so I paid my money and off we went. And actually, it's very nice because, the scenery is beautiful, but all you can see really, if you look across the cabin, of course you can't see very much. You can see the back of the head of the bloke in front of you, and you can see a window, and you can see a fair amount out of the window until the airplane starts to turn, and then all you see is a row of rivets. And I thought, there's got to be a better way of doing it than this. And so then I thought, well, we could apply it to the Boxer. The center section, as I say, it's modular construction, so you could do what you like. You have any center section you like, suit, and This center section is done with seats facing, rather like you sit in an underground train. You know, you're sitting at 90 degrees to the direction of travel. So everybody would be sitting in here looking out that way. So there's nothing to obstruct anybody's view as you fly around, you know, mountains or whatever it is you're looking at. And I thought that that would be a really good thing to have for tourism, for sightseeing. And the nose section, you know, it could either be a standard one, or you could put a helicopter type of 3 seats thing in it, because the CG range would take it. There's absolutely no problem with the CG. If you said, well, I don't want, tourism is only half the season, I want to take pigs to market and granny to hospital, and that kind of thing at other times, then you simply change the center fuselage section and you put in the standard one with doors in it, like the model. So that was, I don't know what you'd call these different things, but I'd call this perhaps the box of scenic. But I think it would be a very good thing for tourism. May I have the next slide, please? This shows the different roles of the different versions. On the left, the removable container for carrying. You can have pre-packed supplies, obviously, and you can just leave them, and when the airplane lands, you can take off and load it up, drop it by parachute. Aerial photography, put in it. You put a small car in it, and it could be used also for crop spraying. The side-loading door version, which I think would be, and particularly nowadays, would be infinitely more, you know, likely to be usable. 6 passengers, air ambulance, freight carriage, and then the military rail. The idea was you have a weapons operator, gunner, sitting on a thing rather like an extended bar stool. He'd be looking out at the top through a cupola, and he'd be sitting on a stool to which was attached underneath anti-tank rockets or whatever weapon that was currently wanted to be employed. And the anti-tank rail would be an obvious one. He can rotate around, and as he turns, all the rockets turn with him. So they'll always get pointing where he is looking. And I think we call that the Boxer Trooper, or something like that. So that would be the light defense aircraft version of the aircraft. And then this is a similar, standard fuselage center section, but it could have an additional load underneath for crop spraying and pest control and that sort of thing. The rockets, the anti-tank rockets would be underneath there, and they just swing around when he swung around. So the pilot could be taking evasive action, while the gunner was concentrating on the target. So you wouldn't have to be attacking a target that you were dependent upon the pilot sort of looking at and pointing his aeroplane at. The pilot could be flying away from it. He could be flying sideways to the target. This guy could still shoot at it. Next slide, please. I haven't added much about performance here. This is based on the original design, which had a Lycoming IO540 290 horsepower engine. And with that engine, it had a max weight of 4,000 pounds, operating weight empty of 215, disposable load, which is near 2,000 pounds virtually, and the cargo capacity of 250 cubic feet, because it's just a big box. The cruising speed of 125 knots, actually 126, I think was worked out. If you made an equivalent aeroplane in terms of payload, but you made it more sleek or more elegant aerodynamically, it would cruise at 132 knots. So that the penalty paid for having all the features that this aircraft has, the penalty in cruise speed would be the difference between 126 and 132 knots then. But that was a 290 horsepower engine. I'm a great believer in thinking that you should not, a thing to go for is a wing loading of 15 pounds a square foot, a power loading of 10, and 10 pounds per square foot, 15 pounds per square foot wing loading, and 10 pounds per horsepower. With a IO-720 engine, say, of 400 horsepower, your lot weight is 4,000 pounds. You've got it. If it is a piston engine of that size and weight, the engine would have to be mounted in front of the main plane with a short drive shaft to the propeller. If it was a turbine engine, then it would take something like a Boeing, a BT-17. If it was a small turbine engine, you could put it right in the tail. But if it was a piston engine, which is heavier, it would have to be mounted just in front of the leading edge of the wing, with a prop shaft of the length of the wing chord. Which would be quite a simple thing, I think, to introduce. And what you could also play with that is that you would have a bearing then just at the back of the fuselage, just before the propeller, which you could manipulate, so you could actually angle the thrust quite easily. You wouldn't have to touch the engine. You'd only have to move the bearing that was holding the prop shaft at the end by the propeller. So that would be something to play with. Next slide, please. These are just shots of the aeroplane as I intended it, the full-sized aircraft to be. The engine is here. The prop shaft would be there. So you could fiddle about with that and angle this. And I haven't, it's just that it would be an interesting thing to experiment with. We have the next slide, please. I think this is all quite good. The landing lights are in the wingtips of the foreplane. The entry to the cockpit is from this side. The idea here was to have the pilot sitting on the left-hand side, which is conventional, and his help operator, crew member, would be in a seat slightly aft, and then he could have a little table behind, so he could do whatever he had to do, and still have somewhere to work. But you could put any cockpit on that you like. As I say, the CG range is so great that with regard to the LDA-01, I loaded it to aft of the aft CG, so that actually the nose wheel was off the ground, and not until I sat in the cockpits did it come back onto the ground. And the stalling characteristics, both level flight and dynamically, were just as good. It really did have extremely safe low speed and stalling characteristics. The fins are angled because these are everything's interchangeable, and so the wingtip glove, which would be metal, would slotted into it the top and the bottom fins, which would be interchangeable, and they're angled to reduce the interference drag, between the wing and the fin. So that saved a lot of induced drag and actually made the airplane a better bet.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you again for Thank you very much, David, for telling us about such an interesting aeroplane. David said he'll take questions. We've got 2 microphones. If you wait for that.
Hello, Hugh Davis, member of the Society. Can you tell us anything about the end, about how it all came to stop?
The end of the project?
Yes.
Well, it was destroyed in a hangar, an arson attack on the hangar where it was kept, and so it came to a very, very sad end, I'm afraid. It was on the night of 16th, 17th of January in 1987, and an arsonist set fire to the hangar, and mine was one of the aeroplanes in it.
It's not thought to be the result of a jealous rival.
Well, I think there were other motives, probably.
Were you intending to spray from the hopper itself, or did you ever fit spray bars to the rear wing?
No, the idea was to fit either those Micronair rotary things or a spray bar, either, whichever. I didn't do any trials on crop spraying at all, largely because the aeroplane was the thing to develop first of all, and then the spray patterns can vary a lot with different things, and if you're going to change the shape of the aeroplane, it would obviously might influence the shape of the spray pattern. So I did discuss it with a lot of people in the spraying world, and worked out where I could put spray bars. I could put them from foreplane to tip of the foreplane, tip of the main plane, like an A-frame underneath, or transversely across, from wingtip to wingtip. All the micron air filters, but air dispensers. But that was something that would come later.
Has any other developer sought to emulate the layout? Its advantages seem so significant, especially the CG range, and you would have thought the example you set might have been followed elsewhere. Do you know of anything?
Not in this category of aeroplane. I mean, there are plenty of airplanes with, canards or tandem wing type configuration, which have but I don't know of anybody in the utility aircraft world that has now.
Seems to offer such terrific advantages that it's, in retrospect, surprising that your arsonist disaster didn't give rise to an opportunity for rivals or copycats.
Yes, I don't think the arsonist had anything to do with that sort of thing.
Given the fact it happened, you seem to have demonstrated in spades the practicality of the arrangement, and in that sense, I'm surprised that no one's followed you.
Yes, well, I think, in a way, I suppose I am. I think the thing is that most people, aircraft manufacturers, design teams and so forth, have got their own ideas, or nobody really wants to take on. Very seldom do you get a case where somebody goes to a manufacturer and says, I've got an idea for an aeroplane, and they take it on. Usually they say, thanks very much, but we've got our own design team. So I think that there is that. You also pay a price, because in order to get the handling characteristics and the things which this aeroplane has, you cannot extract from the main wing at the back as much as you could do in terms of lift if you had the conventional arrangement with download on the tailplane. I mean, the advantage of this is smaller because you've got lift coming from both front and the back, but it is a compromise. And so there are people who are very pro this sort of thing, like Bert Rutan built plenty of canards, but there are plenty of people who don't like canard tandem wing arrangements. So I think there would be a big debate going on in the aerodynamics department as to whether it was a good idea, and so forth. But for the role which it is designed for, which is to be a very simple and safe aeroplane and to be built by embryonic aircraft industries in countries overseas where they've got a use for the aeroplane, I think that it would be the right configuration. I don't feel every aeroplane ought to be like this at all. In fact, I'm working on a design at the moment which doesn't look anything like this. But that's a different thing. I just feel it's the right configuration for this role. But,
as a supplementary.
Sorry?
As a supplementary question, does the Cessna Caravan come closest to achieving what you set out to achieve in the...
It's a bit bigger because it's got a PT6, isn't it? It's a bit bigger, but I would say it was more directly comparable to maybe a Cessna 185 or 205. But so it's in that sort of area, yeah. But the Caravan is a bigger airplane with much more power.
Can you say something about the Miles Technical School at Woodley? I've always been very intrigued as to why it was Miles seemed to accumulate a number of captured German aeroplanes just after the war.
They had a Vire glider, didn't they? Yes. what other? I can't remember. What other?
Well, I think they had Narado 96, and of course the old Air Britain Junkers 52. That was their clubhouse. Actually, I went there in 1948 to discover the whole place had been shut down, and I think there were various fuselages in the factory covered in dust sheets, and that was it. But it just intrigued me as to, I hadn't heard of a Mars technical school, and I exactly wondered how many people were in it, what the subjects taught, and so on.
Oh, well, the subjects that were taught, well, I mean, if you really want to know the details, there is someone who runs the MATS, Mars Aeronautical Technical, sort of old scholars thing. So if you're really interested, I can give you the name and address of this person who can put you in touch with the whole story. But in broad terms, aircraft design and construction was taught. We were taught, drawing and machining in the workshop, and we were building a wooden aeroplane called the Dumbo, a twin-engined aeroplane. So it was aerodynamic structures, every aspect of it. They were very... I'm full of admiration. I thought the Miles family were terrific. They're very innovative. I mean, the nearest thing to the Miles family today is Burt Rutan. Every Thursday afternoon they come out with a new prototype. It might be bits sawn off one aeroplane and glued onto another, but I mean, they were having a go at all sorts of things. And they were full of good ideas, I thought. I mean, not all their ideas were good, but I mean, they had a go at everything. And
my name's Peter Waller. I was interested in the use of the airfoils on the rear wing for elevator and aileron. Did you manage to maintain the full aileron authority, irrespective of the pitch input? I ask this because a few years ago I used to do a lot of flying in a Wiesler Stork.
Oh, yes.
And that had the flaps interconnected with the ailerons.
Yeah.
And you maintained full aileron authority more or less independently of flap position. And they also managed to make the geometry such that you had differential aileron as well.
You had what, sorry?
Differential aileron was achieved on top of the drooping of the ailerons with flap.
Yeah. But
which seemed to be the same basic problem that you have.
Yes. Did they have, I mean, the flaps didn't have differential as well, or did they?
No. It was the ailerons maintained the differential action irrespective of the flap, which really moves the datum of the ailerons.
Well, they probably got a better system. I mean, the answer to your question is no. If you move the stick diagonally across the cockpit, you use, you've got enough aileron and enough elevator, but they weren't as much. I can't remember the exact figures. No, there was a certain loss in movement if you move the stick diagonally across the cockpit, but not one that was ever. The controls were incredibly powerful, and so you never needed full aileron. So it wasn't actually a question which arose and thought, I have to do something about this, because it didn't arise as a problem. And then, of course, as there was so much elevator power anyhow, and the whole system was scrapped and taken out of the airplane, and just aileron and elevator in the wrong way, the question then didn't arise, because you could easily put aileron differential into that.
Could I ask, David, did you certificate it under permit to fly?
Yes.
Was that through the PFA?
It was, yes. Yeah.
And you found
John Pottinger. Yes. John Walker and
yes.
John. Yeah. You dealt with him as well, I expect, with yours. Yeah.
Could I ask whether the replaceable middle units were part of the load-bearing path through the aircraft, or were they a plug-in to a load-bearing independent structure?
Yeah, no, the structure, they were quite independent. They were not load-bearing, and the airplane could fly without it. It was not everything. And of course, the bending moment on the fuselage sort of goes like that. So the bending moment was quite low in the middle of the fuselage.
Thank you, Frank Armstrong. Looking at the aircraft as it stands now, the concept is still entirely valid, I would have thought. And you yourself have indicated that you still essentially believe in it as a concept. And I think it's a great example of Rutan type thinking, it seems to me, where somebody designs a flying machine to suit certain purposes from scratch without preconceived tendency to make it one shape or another. And it makes me wonder whether there is still some potential for the use of it. We often have discussions in the news media about the need for rapid reaction to disasters and all sorts of problems around the world. And one hears of various aircraft concepts of one kind and another that might be helpful. And of course there is the economic issue, but you have certainly come up with a machine which appears to offer the potential of very low production cost and great versatility, and of course as a concept it's scalable. You could make different sizes of these things. And I wondered whether there was any possibility of interesting some development agency or UN agency or something of that sort, some sort of perhaps international body which is trying to devise systems that would be of use in welfare and disaster relief and general utility. In other words, really, I'm suggesting one shouldn't give up. One shouldn't give up hope for a thing like this. Do you feel that there's any scope for that? Sorry for the long speech.
No, not at all. Well, thank you very much. No, I agree absolutely. It's not out of date. It's a truck. People make trucks, new trucks every year. So, and it's still all the features of it are absolutely valid. And certainly distressed area relief was very much one of its intended roles. I really hoped it was going to be of benefit to mankind rather than blowing it up sort of thing. But, you could get 3 of those into a C-130, for example, take the wings off, as you saw in the picture. So, and I've always felt on the distressed air relief front, why doesn't, the United Nations or whoever say to the military, pick centers around the world and introduce the military into it, because they've got the infrastructure, they've got the transport aircraft, they can defend the routes that they're trying to get food or medicines to. So I would have thought it was the obvious thing to do instead of wondering who's going to look after things. If that was so, if there was a disaster in South America or Bangladesh or wherever it was, the nearest centre with the C-130s or whatever they were could rush in and cope with it. And those things, of course, could operate locally if they were brought into it. Well, they could fly out because the ferry range, if you put fuel in the cargo area, is 3,000 miles. I think you would probably have rather a sore bottom and not want to stick that out. But, in fact, you could, but practically it wouldn't be a really, really good idea. But yes, I think that it is very much an aeroplane which, I have, as regards these agencies you mentioned, I have tried over the years, and I've produced, business plans and kept up to date with who, where, how much, everything. And I've got several brochures on it, which I've kept in tandem with the developing of the aeroplane, development of the business approach. And I have got absolutely nowhere. And I've tried, I can't think of a country which is likely to use it that I haven't tried. I've tried all the things that used to exist in this country, like TDC and ICFC and so forth. They were very helpful, encouraging. And then they say, what you've got to do is present a business plan, you've got to build an airplane, you've got to show that it works. And when I did all that, showed them films and all the rest of it, they said, no. And I said, okay, why not? You've been very encouraging to date. You've told me that I should produce a business plan. I've done that. You told me I should build an airplane. I've done that. What's wrong? We don't like airplanes. You know, that was one answer I got from one of these government or Hangar type things. I mean, it's something which they could have said in the first instance. But I found, I mean, they had lovely offices, you know, the nicest furniture and the thickest carpets. What Bob Hope would describe as feeling airsick on the carpets as a water. I mean, I just found them, I tried and tried and tried, believe me. And nobody came up and said, the reason we don't like it is because we don't believe your production costs or things, or we don't believe the marketing is right, or we don't think the airplane flies properly. Nobody ever said that. They just said no. Oh, yes. I've known Bert for a long time. In fact, I quite often bump into him now and again. And he's done marvellously, hasn't he? Actually, I flew that. We were talking about it not so long ago, before he flew his Very Vigan, which was the first aeroplane that he made. But I mean, he's now almost moved out of aeroplanes and into space, isn't he? So he's done fantastically well. But he's always built research aeroplanes, which is where all the fun is. In fact, he says that's what goes on in Mojave. It's the F word, fun. That's what we have. And I was talking to him a while back, and he said, you know, I've never actually ever certificated an airplane because he doesn't put anything into production. But he's, you know, someone comes along and says, build me an airplane to win the Reno air races, he'll do it. I mean, he and his team, he's got a very good team of chaps there. And I envy them. They must have a wonderful time.
Hello, Philip Ransom. Many years ago, I suppose it must have been in the early 70s, a model of the LDA aircraft, a wind tunnel model, appeared at Kingston Polytechnic.
Yes.
I imagine a project student used it for some work, but I'm not sure whether any data was of any value to your work. The model stayed there for many, many years afterwards, and we used it to explain to our design students the way unusual concepts could be exploited, and also particularly the idea of simplicity, interchangeable parts, minimum number of parts, and cutting production costs. This sort of thing, is very valuable to give to students in their formative years. As I say, the model stayed there for many years afterward, but about 12 years ago we moved the laboratory to another building, and I'm not sure whether the model actually survived the move. You know what it is when things get moved out of a building. Things get lost or put into a skip, unfortunately. But it was a very interesting model, perhaps one of the most interesting models we had in the laboratory. Coming back to the previous question, I must say that I sympathise with you greatly, because I got involved on the periphery of another project for a firefighting aircraft, and we put together all sorts of plans with various people, with an aeroplane using interchangeable parts from other models, building it up like a Meccano set, put in several applications for funding for development work from the European Union and other sources, and yeah, they said do it, and then in the end they said, well, you don't get many forest fires in the UK, do you? So we're not going to support it. Anyway, thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it a great deal.
Yeah, but I remember that model. It was silver, wasn't it? And it was John Stollery, who I think, was he there when you were there?
He went on to Cranfield, certainly.
But I think he was at Imperial College at one stage, because I thought it was, I remember a long time ago now, but I thought he was the chap who agreed to get the students to have a go at doing some testing on it. But, you know.
Just mentioning the model, I have a feeling that there's a model that's around about 18 inches span in the Science Museum store, but I think that's painted in the white and blue livery, but I've got a feeling that at Blythe House there may be a model. It's 5 years or something since I've seen it, but I have a feeling that there is. But I'll try and check next time I go, and if I do, I'll try and let you know. My point was picking up on this utility and the industry's aversion to sponsoring budget projects, and I think we've seen this over a number of years. I mean, the RAF at one point turned down the Islander potentially because it had a fixed undercarriage and looked old-fashioned, and didn't want to replace the Pembroke with something that potentially looked almost as ancient. The Caravan has been seen as too luxurious for most developing nations, and in response, Gippsland have produced the Airvan, which is not quite as big, but is very much a third world type production. And I gather there's is it a Kodiak? There's a firm in Alaska who are building, again, a budget caravan. But there does seem to be an aversion as soon as somebody tries to do something as a budget project, investors don't see the multiplication factor, the markups and all the prestige that goes with something that is state of the art. If you wanted it fiberglass or titanium, then it's much more likely to tick the right boxes. But I think it shows that the Skyvan, to some extent, picked up some of the market, but the Islander's really the only utility aeroplane that's sold worldwide in quantities of 4 to 6 and things. Pulling together all the African nations and getting them all to reliably and without corruption sign up for 6 of each. I think it just means people like the UN say, the negotiations will just be enormous and we'll end up with 500 of these in packing cases that can't be delivered and we can't train the people to put them together. And I think that's probably what kills the budget aeroplane. And perhaps it's a tribute to Britain Norman that they're the only people who really cracked that area where they weren't looking for orders for 500 or anything. And in fact, when they did approach the big boys like the RAF, it was 20 years before the RAF saw how useful it was. But and they managed that without a big access door, whereas at least Skyvan did have a sort of drive-up twin-tail approach. And as Beach found out with their Starship, eventually it was just a bit too different.
Oh, well, that was a very different aeroplane.
Yeah, but again, an unusual configuration.
Yeah, but I mean, the manufacturing cost and then the management made the fuselage.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't a budget aeroplane, but again, it was just that bit nervous to go somewhere, which was unusual, and arguably Boeing with the blended wing body also. There were enough people thinking, do we really want to get something that different? And it's time, really, that people should trust in the expertise of the designers like yourself and take a risk.
Yes. But I don't think anybody has produced an aeroplane with the degree of interchangeability or the simplicity. But of course, also, one's got to be careful when you're selling to some parts of the world because they might feel they were being patronized if you said, we've got a very simple aeroplane just right for you. That's the last thing they want to hear. They'd like to make something that makes a supersonic bang on President's Day or something. So it really has to be presented as the latest state of the art rather than the simplest thing in the world.
I think in my experience of having attempted to launch some aircraft in the so-called third world, 20 years ago, there were some possibilities of this. The third world remains the third world because the only reason for existence is to take money or make an enormous amount of money out of anything, offer them a cheap aeroplane, and they're going to say, where's the $2 million needed for my pension fund in Switzerland? I think this is impossible now. Just as a question, your flying control system, was that basically the same as the Miles system on their 2 aeroplanes?
No, I don't think it was. I think they had their elevator on the foreplane, like the Routen's aeroplanes.
Yeah.
I think that's not. And I had a lot of argument about him years and years ago when he was building the Wigan. And he's very adamant that the elevator should be on the foreplane. But the whole point about and the means of achieving such a safe low-speed handling and stalling characteristic is because the control surface, it hasn't the foreplane has stalled, but the surface which carries the primary pitch control has not stalled, so it is inherently safer.
I see. You probably have come across a Miles patent somewhere if you had done, in fact.
I don't think I'm pretty sure both Liverlula designs, the M35 and the 39B, I think they both had their elevator on the foreplane.
Yes.
I'm sure they did, yeah. Mm. It's the natural thing to think when you see a tail-first aeroplane. You think, oh, well, that's where the elevator is. And I don't know of another tandem wing or canard configuration that has this control system.
We're probably coming to the end of
absolutely.
this.
Yeah.
David, could I thank you very, very much for coming and telling us about your project. To me, it's been absolutely fascinating to see what can be done by a small group of enthusiasts and individuals without big government money, not quite in the living room, on the living room table, but at least in a Nissen hut. Mm. It's been a wonderful story that you've told remarkably well. The sad thing is it hasn't gone to production, and that's really emphasized to all of us that in a way getting a prototype flying is the easy bit, and getting the big money and the production going is the difficult one, and you've been caught in that, as have others. Thank you so much for telling us about it, and it's been a real privilege to hear from you. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you again for coming.